The transit hub at Aethori Station smelled like 3 different worlds at once. That was the thing about junction hubs. They never smelled like anything in particular, because everything in particular was always passing through. Rendered fat from Durath III cooking stalls mingled with the sweet chemical tang of Aethori nutrient vapor dispensaries and the sharp mineral bite of recycled atmosphere from the lower rings. Marcus Hale had been stationed at Aethori for 11 months, and he still couldn't walk through the main concourse without his nose making a complete inventory of the universe. He didn't mind it. He'd stopped minding a lot of things in 11 months. That was not a complaint. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself, in the quiet way of a man who kept most of his accounting internal. Aethori was a good posting by any reasonable metric. The work was real. Transit logistics at a junction hub of this size was not the kind of work that impressed anyone at a dinner party, but it mattered. The sector's 3 competing jurisdictional frameworks meant that someone had to sit in the gap between them and make sure ships landed in the right berths and filings reached the right offices, and the 30-odd species moving through the hub on any given cycle could do their business without someone else's paperwork becoming their problem. He was good at that gap. He had always been good at it. He had been noticing, very tired of being good at it alone. Not tired in a way he'd done anything about. He'd filed it in the column of things that were true and not immediately actionable, along with the Portland rain, and the fact that he ate most of his meals at his desk, and that the observation deck on Ring 2 had one of the better views in the sector, and he went there approximately never because going somewhere with a good view alone, at a certain point, felt like making a point about something. He was carrying one bag, a battered canvas courier satchel that had crossed 14 transit points in the last 3 years and showed every one of them in scuff and fray. Inside it were the usual items: a data pad, a spare filtration mask he never used, a translated copy of Aethori's docking protocols that he did use frequently, more frequently than anyone should, and 1 bar of chocolate, terrestrial dark, 82% cacao, wrapped in foil that had been slightly crushed on one corner from when he'd stuffed the bag under a seat on the Kantor shuttle. He'd been rationing it since the last supply run, 2.5 weeks ago. 3 squares left. He'd planned to eat them tonight, alone in his quarters, while he finished filing the docking variance reports that had been sitting in his queue since Tuesday. There was something almost ceremonial about it. The last of the chocolate, the last of the week's backlog, the end of a run of days that had been correct and entirely unremarkable in the way that most of his days had become correct and unremarkable. That was the plan. The plan lasted until he turned the corner near Gate 7 Echo and nearly walked into a small person, sitting directly on the floor of the concourse. He stopped. He looked down. She was very small. Not small in the way of children who are young but still proportioned like abbreviated adults. Small in a genuinely delicate way, all fine-boned limbs and large eyes, the way some species evolved in low-gravity environments or in places where compactness was an advantage. She had the silver-pale skin common to Aethori people, smooth and faintly iridescent in the station's overhead light, like the inside of a shell, and her hair was dark, almost black, pulled into 2 small knots at the base of her neck with what looked like pins shaped like tiny moons. She was wearing a garment that was clearly expensive, or had been, a layered thing in deep blue-gray with silver stitching along the collar, now crumpled from however long she'd been sitting on the floor of a transit concourse. She was eating nothing, holding nothing. She was sitting very still with her knees pulled up to her chest and her eyes, very large, very pale, the amber gold color that Aethori children had before the color deepened with age, fixed on the middle distance in the specific way of someone who is trying very hard not to cry. Marcus looked around. The concourse was busy in the way junction hubs were always busy, moving bodies, rolling carts, announcements cycling through 14 language overlays on the PA system. Nobody was looking at a small girl sitting on the floor near Gate 7 Echo. Nobody had stopped. People streamed past her at a comfortable 3-foot clearance, the automatic social adjustment of transit travelers who had learned that slowing down in a busy concourse was its own problem. He looked back down at her. She hadn't moved. She was still staring at a point roughly 6 feet in front of her and 2 feet off the floor, and her hands, he noticed, were clasped very tightly together in her lap. He set his satchel down on the floor beside him and crouched. She didn't look at him immediately. Kids who were lost, he'd worked transit long enough to know the specific variety of stillness that came over them, often didn't look right away. They had committed to being small and unmoving and hoping the situation would resolve, and making eye contact with a stranger felt like abandoning the plan. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were remarkable up close. Most Aethori he'd interacted with at the station were adults, and adults' eyes had shaded from the pale amber of childhood into something richer, more copper or deep gold. Hers were still that early color, true amber, like tree resin held up to light, and they were currently making the calculation that all lost children eventually had to make, which was whether this stranger was safe. He kept very still and let her make it. "Are you lost?" he asked. He said it in standard first, then tried his limited Aethori, though Velith Kai, which he was fairly sure meant something in the vicinity of "Are you well?" asterisk, but the grammar was approximate and he was possibly conjugating it incorrectly for a child. She blinked at his attempt. Something in her expression shifted, the edge of it. Not a smile, but the softening that preceded one. "I speak standard," she said. Her voice was soft and precise. Aethori children learned standard young. The compact required it for transit travel, and this child's diction was better than many adults he'd processed through docking. "I am not lost." "Okay," he said. He didn't argue with this. "Can I sit here for a minute?" She looked at the floor beside her, then back at him. This was evidently an acceptable arrangement, because she said nothing to the contrary. He sat. He didn't make a production of it, just folded himself down to the floor beside her, back against the wall, and put his satchel across his knees. The concourse continued its indifferent traffic around them. He didn't ask her anything else. He'd learned in 11 months at Vellery that some conversations needed a moment to happen on their own. He watched the foot traffic instead. A pair of Durath merchants arguing over a cargo manifest. 3 compact officers in blue-gray uniform heading toward the restricted terminal. A family of 7, with a quantity of luggage that was making the station cart very unhappy. The girl watched the same traffic. After a while, she said, "My guardian was supposed to wait at this gate. And they weren't here. I went to look at the display, the one with the arrival times." She gestured vaguely in the direction of Gate 7 Echo. "It was not far, but when I came back there were many people and I could not find them." He nodded. It was the transit hub version of a story as old as the concept of crowded places. A child who stepped away for 1 minute, a crowd that shifted, a guardian who was probably right now somewhere in this concourse in a rising state of alarm. "How long ago was this?" he asked. 15 of your minutes, she said. "I counted." 15 minutes was not very long. It was also, for a small child alone in a junction hub, long enough to feel like much more. "My name is Marcus," he said. "I work here at the station. I help with docking and arrivals." This was a simplification of his actual role, which was civilian transit coordinator, 3rd grade, with a specialty in interspecies variance filings that mostly meant paperwork and very occasional moments of genuine consequence. But "I help with arrivals" was true and captured the important part. She considered this information. "You have a badge," she said, looking at the lanyard he wore. "I do." He held it up so she could see it. His photo terrible. He'd had a cold the day they'd taken it, his name and the station seal. "That's how you know I'm supposed to be here." She read the badge with the focused intensity that Aethori children seemed to bring to text. "Marcus Hale," she said carefully, preserving both syllables. "That's right. I am Sevi," she said. She said it with a natural authority, as though this were something she had been told was important to convey clearly. Just the one name. No family designation, no house identifier. But the way she said it made him think she was accustomed to the name landing with some weight, and had decided that introducing all of it was perhaps unnecessary for the purposes of this conversation. "Sevi," he repeated, "nice to meet you." She nodded, accepting this. "We should probably find your guardian," he said. "I can contact the station's family assistance office. They have people whose whole job is exactly this situation. I can walk with you to the desk if you want." "Yes," she said, "that would be acceptable." He almost smiled at acceptable asterisk. It was not the word a child who was frightened said. It was the word a child who was trying to handle the situation with dignity said, which was a different thing, and a somewhat more interesting one. He stood and held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, assessing, not afraid, and then placed her small hand in his with the gravity of someone entering into a formal agreement. They walked. Gate 7 Echo to the family assistance office was a 4-minute walk at adult pace, longer at a small child's measured stride. He adjusted without thinking about it. She walked beside him with her chin up and her eyes moving in careful sweeps, cataloging, the way Aethori often did in unfamiliar spaces, their peripheral vision somewhat wider than a human's and their instinct apparently to record environments rather than simply pass through them. She was gathering data on Aethori Station, and doing it without letting her data gathering show too obviously, and he found this quietly admirable in a 6-year-old. Or however old she was, Aethori development rates didn't track cleanly to human years. She might be 6 or 8 or 10. Her height suggested young. Her vocabulary suggested otherwise. "Have you been to Aethori before?" he asked, as they turned into the main promenade corridor. "No," she said, "we are in transit. We do not usually come to this junction." "We, her and her guardian presumably and possibly others." He didn't press. "It's a good hub," he said. "One of the bigger ones in this sector. A lot of species come through here, which means the food vendors are excellent." She looked up at the food vendor stalls along the promenade. There was a Aethori condensed nutrient station, a human-run sandwich counter, and a Aethori licensed confectionery stall that sold crystallized sugar formations that looked vaguely architectural. "Why do they build the sugar like buildings?" she asked. "I honestly don't know," he said. "I think it's art, or it might be practical. The structure means they stay solid at transit hub atmospheric temperature." She considered this. "Both then?" "Probably both." She nodded as though filing this. They walked past a display kiosk cycling through transit announcements in 6 languages. She read the Aethori one at what he suspected was a rather high speed for a person her size. "I am hungry," she said. It was a statement of fact, delivered without complaint, which he suspected was how she'd been taught to report her needs. He looked at the stalls. He had station credits on his employee card. The sandwich counter was nearest. But he also noticed, this was not the most important thing. It was just a thing that she was looking not at the sandwich counter or the nutrient dispensary but at the confectionery stall, at a specific display of wrapped items he couldn't quite make out from this angle. The look of someone who had noticed something and was already in the process of deciding they did not need it. He reached into his satchel, and his hand found the chocolate bar before he'd finished the decision. 3 squares. 3 squares of the last terrestrial dark chocolate between him and the next supply run, which was at least 2 weeks away, possibly more depending on the Kantor shuttle schedule. He pulled it out. The foil was slightly crumpled on one corner. "Here," he said, and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "What is it?" "It's called chocolate. It's a human food made from a plant we grow on Earth. This kind is dark chocolate, which means it's less sweet than some, but most people like it. He paused. Some aliens don't. The chemistry is different for different species, and some of them find it bitter. But Aethori biology is pretty compatible with most terrestrial foods, so it should be safe for you. She was still looking at it with the expression of someone who was taking in more information than the object itself contained. "You are giving me your food," she said. "I am. You only have 3 pieces." He looked at the bar, then at her. "I can count," he confirmed. Something happened in her expression. It was not quite what he expected, not the uncomplicated delight of a child receiving a treat, which was the normal response to this kind of transaction. It was something quieter and more complicated. A child who had, he suspected, received many gifts from many people who had reasons for giving them, and who was currently trying to identify the reason for this one. "I don't need anything from you," he said, because he recognized what she was calculating. "I just think you've had a longer 15 minutes than 15 minutes is supposed to be, and you said you were hungry and I have chocolate. That's the whole thing." She looked at the bar for another moment, then she took it from his hand. She unwrapped it with the careful attention of someone who had decided to approach this as a deliberate experience rather than a rushed one. He watched her eat the first small piece and waited. Her eyes did the thing. The slight widening, then the processing look, the brain going "what is this?" and arriving, apparently, at a favorable answer, because a small, private smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She chewed slowly, thinking about it. "It is good," she said. "Yeah," he agreed, "it is." "It is the same as sweet but different," she said. "There is something underneath it." "That's the bitterness, the cacao, the good kind of bitter, the kind that makes the sweet make more sense." She thought about this while she walked. He could see her storing the idea, the way she stored everything, attentively, permanently. "Like how something difficult makes a good thing better," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like that." They walked the rest of the way to the family assistant's office, him empty-handed, her eating her chocolate in careful, considered pieces that suggested she was making it last. He thought, "This is a very unusual child." He thought it the way you think something when you recognize it as simple truth without attached sentiment or agenda, just unusual, in the good way. The family assistant's office at Aethori was staffed by a Aethori citizen named Orvith Can, who was approximately 7 feet tall, had 4 arms, and possessed the specific energy of someone who had been solving exactly this category of problem for 20 years and had it down to a science. Marcus explained the situation at the desk. Orvith Can listened, typed something, and then regarded the small girl beside Marcus with calm professional attention. "Name for the record?" Orvith Can asked. The girl straightened slightly. "Sevi," she said. Orvith Can's upper hands paused over the input panel. Marcus didn't catch it at first. He was watching the screen, waiting to see if a guardian's arrival filing would come up. He noticed Orvith Can's pause and looked at the Aethori officer's face. Orvith Can was looking at the girl with an expression that was not quite the normal professional neutrality of a family assistance officer processing a routine lost child report. It was something else, something recalibrated. "And your full name, if you please," Orvith Can said carefully. The girl set her remaining chocolate, 1 piece now, on the edge of the desk, with the air of someone putting down a tool they planned to return to, and drew herself up to her full height, which was not very much height, but was delivered with considerable intention. "Sevilithan, of House Aethori." The room did something. There wasn't actually a sound, but Orvith Can's posture shifted, the entire posture, all 4 arms in new configuration, in the specific way of someone receiving information that rewrites the category of a situation. A junior officer on the other side of the desk made a small, involuntary sound and then covered it with a professional cough. Marcus looked at the girl. She was watching Orvith Can with the calm of someone who had just confirmed something they'd been wondering whether to confirm. He didn't know Aethori politics in any depth. He knew basic jurisdictional context for his transit work, who answered to whom, which houses had preferential docking rights, which diplomatic protocols applied to which flags. The name Aethorivel was in that file somewhere, in the part of his knowledge that handled very senior rather than everyday asterisk. The station will contact the family office immediately, Orvith Can said. The professional tone was back in place, but operating at a slightly higher register. We have family assistance protocols for transit guests of the ruling houses, the junior officer said, and then appeared to regret saying it out loud. Marcus looked at Sevi. She was eating her last piece of chocolate. He thought ruling houses. He thought the girl's full name is Sevilithan of House Aethorivel. He thought there is an Aethorivel docking priority flag in the restricted terminal that I have been filing exceptions around for 2 days, because the berth they wanted is occupied. He had a feeling he knew now why it was occupied, and why the berth priority flag had not specified exactly who required priority access, and why it became very clear very quickly. The transit filing that crossed his desk the previous afternoon, and that he had approved with a standard variance notation, was connected to a diplomatic arrival of a specificity he had not been briefed on. He also had a feeling slower in arriving, but arriving with some force, about who Sevi's mother was. Orvith Can was sending priority signals with 2 of their 4 arms while engaging the family office with the other 2, which was a feat Marcus respected. He caught Marcus's eye and communicated, in the wordless way of people who worked in logistics together, that the situation was more particular than initially presented, and that Marcus's assistance in a calm and normal manner for the next several minutes would be appreciated. Marcus communicated back, also wordlessly, that he understood. He sat down on the bench beside the desk. Sevi had finished her chocolate and was neatly folding the foil wrapper into a small square, which she placed in a pocket of her garment. "Your guardian is going to be found soon," he said. "These things get figured out. Orvith Can is very good at this." She nodded. She looked, he noticed, somewhat more comfortable than she had on the floor of the concourse. Not the comfort of a crisis resolved, the situation was not resolved, but the comfort of a person who has decided that the company they're in is acceptable. She swung her feet slightly. Her shoes, he noticed, had small silver clasps, and each clasp was shaped like a crescent moon. "You have chocolate at home?" she asked. "On Earth, yes. It's pretty common there, not as easy to come by in the outer systems." "So that was your last?" "For a while, yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you want to keep it?" He thought about the variance reports waiting in his queue, the empty quarters, the way the last piece had been sitting in his bag for 3 days because he'd been saving it for a moment that felt right and hadn't found one. "Not really," he said. "It needed to go to the right place." She considered this with the gravity she seemed to bring to everything. "I will tell my mother you were kind," she said. "She will want to know." He thought, "Yes, I imagine she will." He said, "That's very thoughtful of you." The woman who arrived 4 minutes later was not preceded by noise. That was the thing that struck him later when he thought about it, and he thought about it more than once in the weeks that followed. With very senior diplomatic arrivals, there was usually sound, staff, movement, the kinetic energy of a retinue. There was usually announcement. There was none of that. One moment the family assistance office was the same small, efficiently run room it always was, and then Orvith Can's junior officer stood up from their seat very quickly, and then the woman was in the doorway. She was not wearing the formal regalia of the Aethori Compact's ruling house. Marcus knew vaguely what that looked like from the diplomatic protocols file. Layered ceremony garments, house colors, the specific crown configuration that the Vel line used for formal occasions. She was not wearing any of that. She was in deep charcoal and silver, the colors subdued, the cut of it functional for travel, and her dark hair was dressed simply, 2 silver pins, no crown. She was nonetheless, unmistakably not ordinary. It wasn't the clothes. It wasn't even the bearing, though the bearing was considerable. It was something simpler. The room changed when she entered it. Not from fear, nothing in the room's energy suggested fear. It was the change of a room when something it has been organized around has arrived. Aethori's skin, silver pale and faintly iridescent. Eyes that had gone from the amber of childhood to something deeper, dark gold, almost copper, the way Aethori eyes often settled in adulthood. She was tall for her species, nearly his height, and her face, when she found her daughter, did something he could not entirely look away from. The composure did not drop. It was not the kind of composure that dropped. But underneath it, the thing that moved was not small. "Sevi," she said. Her daughter's name, in the particular voice of someone who has spent 4 minutes in a transit hub, running through every possibility, and has now reached the one that is still all right. Sevi slid off the bench. "Mother," she said. She crossed the room and went into the woman's arms, and the woman held her in a way that had nothing to do with politics or houses or ruling lineages. Just a mother holding her child. Marcus stood, because that seemed like the right thing to do. He wasn't sure what else seemed right. He was becoming increasingly aware that the situation he had stumbled into while carrying his courier bag and thinking about variance reports was considerably larger than he'd understood, and that he was occupying a very small corner of it, and that his role was probably to take up as little space as possible. After a moment, the woman straightened. Her hands remained on her daughter's shoulders. She looked across the room. Her eyes found him. She held his gaze for a moment, reading him, the way the very practice did it, not analyzing feature by feature but taking in the whole and drawing a conclusion. He stood still and let her do it. "This is Marcus Hale," Sevi said. "He found me. He sat with me and gave me his chocolate." A pause. It was the last of his chocolate. The woman's expression shifted in a way that was very small and very significant. Orvith Khan was making quiet sounds of professional completion at the desk. The junior officer had apparently located a reason to be needed in the back room. The family assistant's office contained, for all functional purposes, 2 adults and a child. "Marcus Hale," the woman said. Her standard was accented, not heavily, but distinctly, the Aethori consonants retaining their native quality even in translation. She said his name with the same careful attention to both syllables that her daughter had. "Yes," he said. "Very useful thing to say, extremely helpful." "I am Velitha," she said, "mother of Sevalathan." And a pause, brief and deliberate, the pause of someone who is deciding how much to unfold. Chair of the Aethori Compact's Transit Accord Commission. Not Queen Asterisk. Not the title he'd been assembling in his head since Sevi had given her full name at the desk. Chair of the Transit Accord Commission. Which was also, he was fairly sure, pulling at the threads of his briefing protocols, a secondary title of the ruling line of House Aethori Vel. The way compact monarchies often worked. The formal crown title was one thing. The governing function title was the one used in diplomatic transit contexts, which meant she had just told him exactly who she was, in the language he would understand from his transit protocols file, rather than in the language of her house's formal usage. She was being considerate about it. He was not sure he would have thought to be considerate in the same situation. "The commission," he said. "I have your docking priority flag on my desk, the Type 7 variants for berth 14 North." Something shifted in her expression, surprise, brief and genuine. "Yes. The berth is occupied by a Aethori research vessel that had a medical emergency yesterday. Their engineer is in the station infirmary, and I couldn't move the ship without a crew override they haven't been able to provide. I've been trying to get you cleared to a comparable berth in the same ring, but the ring coordinator has been waiting on a jurisdictional confirmation from the Compact Transit Office." He paused. I can get that confirmation in about 20 minutes if the compact representative on the line is the right one. If it's Assessor Dalvin, I might need 45. He wasn't sure why he was telling her this. It was his job. She didn't need the details. It had just seemed like the right thing to say when faced with the person the work was actually for. Velitha looked at him for a long moment. It is usually Assessor Dalvin, she said. Then I'll start now. She made a sound that was almost not quite, but almost a laugh. Marcus Hale, she said, and this time when she said his name there was something in it. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the beginning of a different kind of attention. The kind that preceded warmth in people who moved carefully. You gave my daughter your last chocolate, and now you are trying to fix my docking permit. I'm also the person who was supposed to fix the docking permit before you arrived, he said. The chocolate was unrelated. Was it? He thought about that, about the floor of the concourse near Gate 7 Echo and a small girl sitting very still and counting minutes and a bar of terrestrial dark in a crumpled wrapper. Yes, he said. She was just a kid who was lost. That's the whole thing. Velitha looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at her daughter. Sevi was watching this exchange with the alert attention of someone who finds adults very interesting when they don't know they're being observed. She told me you sat with her, Velitha said. That you did not go past. The floor was available. Many people found it unavailable. He didn't say anything to that. She was quiet for a moment. The family assistant's office hummed with the ambient sound of the station, the PA system cycling through its language overlays, the distant percussion of a cargo bay 2 rings over. I would like, she said, and paused in the particular way of someone choosing precision, for you to allow me to return the kindness. Not tonight. Tonight there are protocols and my staff and a great number of things that require my attention. But before we leave Vellery, he opened his mouth to say that wasn't necessary. The chocolate, she said very gently, was the last of yours. He closed his mouth. There is a compact arrangement, she said, when someone does something for a member of our house without being asked. We call it Velthori. It means approximately, a debt of noticing, not a formal debt, a personal one. She paused. I have noticed Marcus Hale, that is all. I only want to notice it properly. He had 11 months of Vellery Station and 14 transit points behind him, and he had learned in all of them that some things were not arguments. Some things were just true. All right, he said. She nodded once. Thank you. Then to her daughter, come, we have staff waiting and your grandmother's message to answer. Sevi came to her mother's side. At the doorway, she paused and turned back, and the look she gave him was not the look of a child being polite. It was the look of a child who has decided something. It was very good chocolate, she said. He smiled. I know. The docking variance took 53 minutes, not 45. He was right that it was Assessor Dalvin. He was right that Dalvin required handling. Dalvin had a specific approach to jurisdictional confirmations that Marcus had catalogued over 11 months. He liked to be the one who found the issue, not the one who confirmed someone else's solution, which meant you had to frame your requests as questions and let Dalvin arrive at the correct answer himself, which took time but produced a more reliable result than pushing. Marcus pushed once in his second month at Vellery and the confirmation had taken 6 hours. He had not pushed since. He pulled in a favor from the ring coordinator, a Vellery woman named Death who owed him for the Dureth III atmospheric exemption he'd quietly arranged in March. Called the Compact Transit Office representative directly rather than going through the usual queue, and had the confirmation sent to Velitha's staff. By the time, the diplomatic team was settled in the station's priority suite. He wrote a note in his own file indicating that the Aethori vessel would need follow-up care when their engineer was discharged, a reminder to himself, since nobody else was going to do it. He also sent a brief message to the infirmary checking on the engineer, because that seemed like the thing to do. He got back to his quarters at what passed for evening in a station that technically observed a 24-hour cycle but had no windows. He sat down at his desk. The variance reports were still in his queue, patient as they always were. He filed them. He made himself tea from the modest supply in his cabinet and sat in the quiet that had its own texture by now, after 11 months. He thought about the chocolate bar. He was not sorry about it. He was not sorry in a deliberate, principled way. It was just that regret did not seem to be an available response to a small girl with large amber eyes sitting on the floor counting to 15 minutes. The logic of the moment had been very simple. He had something that would help, and she needed help, and he had 2 hands and was standing right there. That was the whole architecture of it. He also thought about Sevi's question. Did you want to keep it? He'd told her not really, which was true. But the more accurate version was that he'd been holding onto it for a moment that felt right, and had not found that moment in 2.5 weeks, and had begun to wonder if he had become someone who saved things so carefully they never got used. He was not sure when that had started, the careful saving. Somewhere around month 7, probably, when the uneven quality of the posting had become apparent to him. When he had realized that he was doing good work in a place that could absorb good work without much acknowledgement, and that this was fine and was also, if he was honest, not quite what he needed from the current chapter. The chocolate bar going where it went was, possibly, an event, not a large event, but an event. He also thought less certainly, but still, about the woman in the doorway of the family assistant's office. Aethori, a debt of noticing. He had not expected to be noticed, and finding himself noticed, genuinely noticed, in the specific way she'd said it, not as a courtesy but as a thing she had decided, had done something to the texture of the evening that he was not fully prepared to analyze at this hour. He finished his tea. The variance reports were done. The Aethori engineer was presumably stable in the infirmary. Assessor Dalvin had been Dalvin, and the berth was confirmed. He went to bed. The station hummed its ambient hum, the same hum it hummed every night, and he fell asleep to it with the minor distinction of feeling, for the first time in several months, like the day had gone somewhere worth going. 3 days passed. He processed 17 docking variances, 2 diplomatic protocol updates, 1 genuinely complicated situation involving a Durath merchant who had filed under the wrong species classification code, not maliciously. The forms were confusing. Marcus had long advocated for reform of the forms, and a commendation request from Orvith Khan about his handling of the family assistance situation, which he found in his inbox and wasn't sure what to do with. On the 4th day, a message arrived through official channels, routed through the Compact's liaison office. It was short. It said, "If you are free for 1 hour this evening, I would be grateful for the company. The observation deck on Ring 2 is generally empty at the 19th hour. V***. He read it twice. Then he sent back, "Ring 2, 19th hour, I'll be there." The observation deck on Ring 2 was, as promised, empty. Vellery Station's observation decks were the thing the station did that no one admitted they appreciated until they were standing at one. The station was a junction hub. It existed to process traffic, not to offer views. But the structural engineers who built it had not been entirely without feeling, because each ring had been given at least one observation window, real glass, or the closest thing to it, looking out at the sector. Ring 2's window showed the transit lanes and, beyond them, the edge of the Calanthe Nebula. A slow spread of violet and amber light that had no urgency, no traffic filing, no variance requests, and nothing to recommend it except that it was beautiful and had been there for roughly 14 million years. She was already there when he arrived. Standing at the window, hands at her sides, in the same subdued charcoal and silver she'd been wearing 3 days ago but with her hair somewhat looser. The 2 silver pins still there, but the formal arrangement relaxed into something more private. "You're punctual," she said. "Station work requires it." She turned from the window. She had a thermos, a compact tissue travel vessel, the kind that held temperature well over long journeys, and she held it out. "Aethori tea," she said. "Made with actual Aethori herbs, not the approximation they sell at the concourse vendors. It is not chocolate, but it is mine, and I thought it was a more honest trade." He took the thermos. It was warm in his hand. He took a careful sip, the polite way, given he'd been told enough times that Aethori hospitality involved witnessing, not performing, and let the tea do what it did, which was complex and warm and faintly sweet in a way that was nothing like anything else he'd tasted. "That's very good," he said. "Yes," she turned back to the window. "Sevi liked your chocolate very much." "I heard. She told me she tested it carefully, piece by piece." She was being thorough. Velitha smiled at the nebula. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, a real one, not a diplomatic approximation but something that reached the edges of her eyes. She is always thorough. It is not always convenient, but it is hers. He stood beside her at the window, not too close and not performing distance. The nebula did what nebulas do, which is absolutely nothing at human perceivable speed, and was nonetheless absorbing. "She said you told her it needed to go to the right place," Velitha said. "The chocolate." He thought about how to answer that. She was having a hard 15 minutes. It seemed like it would help. It did. A pause. "She does not usually take things from strangers. She has been instructed not to." "She evaluated it carefully," he said. "I think she's pretty good at that." "Yes," Velitha said, and there was something in the word that was very quiet and very fond, and not the way a politician spoke about their heir, just the way a parent spoke about their child. "She is." They were quiet for a moment. The nebula expanded at whatever geological pace it expanded at. "May I ask," she said, "how you came to be at Velori?" It was a diplomatic question, which meant it was also a personal one. People in transit logistics did not end up at junction hubs in the outer sector by ambition. They ended up there by a series of reasonable decisions that collectively composed a direction. And sometimes you arrived at the end of that direction and looked at where you were and thought, "Well, I'm good at the work," he said, "and the work is needed here. The sector's got 3 competing jurisdictional frameworks and nobody who speaks all of them, and things fall through the gaps if someone isn't there to notice." He paused. "I notice things." "Yes," she said, "I gathered that." She was looking at the window, not at him, but he had the distinct impression of being regarded anyway. Aethori peripheral vision, probably. Or just the attention of someone who was very practiced at listening to things that weren't only words. "And before Velori?" she asked. 14 other postings," he said. "Kantor, Durath Relay, the Meridian Exchange Hub, 3 different border transit points. Before that, Earth." He considered what to say about Earth. "I'm from a city called Portland. It's a quiet city mostly. It rains a lot." "You miss the rain." He thought about it. Genuinely, he turned the question over and looked at it honestly. "I miss knowing what the weather is going to be. Stations have their own climate systems which are consistent but not varied. You don't get surprised by them. And there's something about a day that goes exactly as predicted every single day that starts to feel like something is not being offered," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah, like something is not being offered." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the window. "Ether has seasons," she said. "The northern continent in winter has ice that forms in geometries. I have seen it every winter since I was smaller than Sevi, and it still surprises me. The angles change, something about the year's particular cold, the way it falls." A pause. "I think things that surprise you are important. They are the sign that you are still somewhere that is alive." "Yeah," he said, "I think so too." A transit ship moved through the visible transit lane, long and slow, the deep-running lights blinking in the compact's navigation code. They both watched it, neither commenting on it, because some things didn't require commentary. "Sevi told me," Velitha said, "that you explained to her why dark chocolate tastes the way it does. The bitterness underneath." She asked a good question. "She said you told her it was like how something difficult makes a good thing better." She paused. "She has been repeating this to everyone, at length." He almost laughed. "I'll accept responsibility for that. She is using it to explain why her mathematics lessons are important," Velitha said, and there was something in her voice that was warm and slightly exhausted in the way of a parent who has been quoted at. "Apparently the difficulty is the bitterness, and the understanding will be the sweet." "She's not wrong." "No," Velitha said, "she rarely is. It is one of the things I have learned to simply accept." They were quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, the kind that had been earned, that had content in it, that was comfortable in a way the beginning of the evening had not been. He thought about what it took, in his experience, to get to that kind of quiet with a person, usually more time than this. The observation deck was quiet except for the ambient hum of the station systems. Outside, the Calenthi Nebula did its 14-million-year thing. Somewhere in the station, things were being filed and approved and routed, and Assessor Dalvin was probably making someone's afternoon more difficult, and the Quethori engineer was presumably improving in the infirmary, the ordinary machinery of the place. He had been inside that machinery for 11 months, and it had been good, real, and also not quite enough. "How long is your transit?" he asked. 3 more days, she said. "Then we continue to the compact session. Sevi comes with me. There is a schooling facility attached to the building where the session meets, and she does not like to be left." A slight pause. "She is, as I said, always thorough. She likes to know where things are." "She gets that from you," he said, before he'd quite decided to say it. Velitha looked at him, a real look, not the peripheral kind. "Yes," she said after a moment, "I imagine she does." He looked back. The light from the nebula was doing something to the color of the room, very slightly violet, the ambient glow that the observation deck window admitted, and it caught the silver pins in her hair and the pale iridescence of her skin in ways that the transit hub's practical overhead lighting had not. He thought 3 more days. He thought that's a reasonable amount of time to do something with. He said, "There's a vendor on Ring 3 that imports terrestrial goods. I'm fairly sure they carry chocolate. Not 82% cacao probably, but the regular kind." He paused. "I was thinking I might pick some up before your transit continues." She was quiet for a moment. "For Sevi," he said. "Of course," she said, and the gravity of her voice had something in it that he could not quite identify, except that it was warm and it was there. She would be very pleased. "I'll leave it at the family suite," he said. "No need to." "You could bring it," she said. "If you were free, there is no protocol requirement either way." He looked at her. She was looking at the nebula again. "I could be free," he said. 1900 hours is generally when Sevi finishes her lessons, she said. "She is usually available then if someone wanted to bring her something." "That's convenient," he said. "Yes," she said, "I thought so." He brought the chocolate on the second day. It was not 82% cacao. It was the standard variety, the mass-market kind that they sold in transit shops throughout the sector. But the vendor on Ring 3 had, improbably, stocked a small case of it, and the man behind the counter had said it was popular with the diplomatic transits, and Marcus had thought, "Of course it is." He brought it to the family suite at 1900 hours. Sevi answered the door. She looked at him, then at the package in his hand, then at him again, with the same sequential assessment she'd applied to the chocolate bar 3 days ago. "You brought more," she said. "You liked it," he said. I did, she confirmed. She took the package, looked at it, then looked back up at him. Mother said you might come. She told you. She said someone from the station might bring me something. She did not say who. A pause. But she used a different voice than she uses when she does not know who it will be. He had no immediate response to this observation, which was delivered with perfect matter-of-factness by a child who was, he was increasingly certain, going to be formidable when she grew up. "Is your mother here?" he asked. "She is finishing a message. She said to ask you to come in." Sevi stepped back with the air of a person conducting an arrival. He came in. The family suite was station standard in structure, and distinctly not station standard in everything else. The Compact's diplomatic team had clearly been here before, and knew how to make transit quarters into something habitable. There were textile pieces in Aethori patterns on the surfaces. The air had been adjusted to Aethori atmospheric preference, slightly richer in a compound he couldn't name. And a small folded structure on the low table held what looked like correspondence or a document he shouldn't try to read. Sevi sat on the floor with her chocolate, and a precision he found impressive immediately began working out how many pieces were in the package. "How was your lesson today?" he asked, because it seemed like the kind of question one asked. "We did transit mathematics," she said, "because we are on a transit hub and Mother thought it was practical." "I already know transit mathematics." She paused. "I told her this. She said knowing and doing are different things." "Your mother is correct." "I know," Sevi said, with the specific tone of a child who finds the correctness of a parent's position inconvenient but not ultimately disputable. "I redid the mathematics. They were still right." "Did you tell her that?" "Yes," she said *good, which is not the same as being surprised, but I think she was a little bit pleased. He sat down on the couch, which was at a safe remove from the sitting on the floor with chocolate operation, and thought that Sevi was one of the more interesting people he had met on this posting, including the adults. She solved the piece-counting question, apparently, to her satisfaction, and set the package aside with the careful authority of someone who has made a plan for it. "I looked up Portland," she said. "I heard you might have." She looked at him steadily. "I look things up when I want to know them." "That seems right," he said. "It rains more than average for Earth cities," she said, "but not more than the most rainy cities, more than the middle." She paused. "Do you think that is why it is a quiet city, the middle amount of rain?" He considered it with the seriousness she was bringing to it. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's because when it rains a certain amount people stay in, and when people stay in they become quieter, more internal." Sevi thought about this. Her chocolate sat beside her, temporarily forgotten, which was the sign that an idea had taken priority. "On ether in winter," she said, "when it precipitates, people do not go out as much either. They stay in and do things that do not require large spaces. Small things, careful things." She looked at him. "Mother says winter is the season for thinking about important things, because you have time." "Your mother is very wise," he said. "Yes," Sevi said, with an air of comfortable agreement. "She says it is because she has had to think about important things often, so she has learned which conditions help." She picked up her chocolate and considered it. "I think you think about important things also." "What makes you say that?" She ate a piece, thought while she chewed. "You sat down on the floor," she said. "That was not the easy thing to do. You had somewhere to go. I did not have anywhere to go, so you chose my not anywhere over your somewhere." She paused. "That is a choice about what is important." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I suppose it is." "The chocolate was also a choice about what is important," she said. "You saved it for a good time. I was a good time." He looked at her. She said it with complete simplicity, not vanity, not self-consciousness, just the observation offered plainly. "Yeah," he said, "you were." She nodded, satisfied, and ate the rest of that piece. "I will tell you something," she said, with the air of someone making a considered decision. I was not only counting minutes on the floor. I was also deciding not to cry. It was difficult. The floor was not comfortable, and I did not know where my guardian was, and I did not want to be the kind of person who cries on the floor of a station. "What kind of person is that?" he asked. She thought about it. "One who stops being able to wait," she said. I was still able to wait, but it was getting close. He sat with that for a moment. "I'm glad I came around that corner when I did," he said. "Yes," she said, "so am I." Velitha arrived from the inner room 12 minutes later. He knew this because the station's internal time display was on the far wall and he was, as he'd told her, punctual by profession. She was in softer garments than he'd seen her in before, still compact colors, still the quality of her house, but the formality turned down several degrees. The silver pins were there. So was, faintly, the look of someone who had just finished a long message and was willing to be finished with it. "You came," she said. "Sevi let me in," he said. She would. She looked at her daughter, who was regarding the remaining chocolate with strategic consideration. "Is she terrorizing you with Portland?" "It was a productive conversation," he said. "She has been reading about rain," Velitha said, and there was something in her voice that was both fond and mildly resigned. Specifically about the atmospheric conditions that produce rain in Pacific coastal cities. "She explained it to me this morning at some length." "She has good questions," he said. "She does." Velitha sat down in the chair adjacent to his end of the couch, not across the room, not at the formal distance the room's geometry permitted. Adjacent. He noted this without making a point of noting it. All of them, everyone, at all hours. He thought about what Sevi had said. She used a different voice. He thought about that and filed it in the same place he'd been filing other things about this evening. The careful, deliberate file of things he was not going to decide about prematurely. 3 days, he said, then the compact session. Yes, she folded her hands in her lap. Not closed, not the composed stillness of a diplomat in a meeting, but the natural rest of someone who was, for this hour, not in a meeting. It will be long. The session always runs past its scheduled time, and there are 3 parties with competing frameworks who have all filed their objections in the same week and are now obligated to hear each other's objections in sequence. She paused. It will be tedious. I do a lot of jurisdictional framework filings, he said. I know. She looked at him. How do you manage it? He thought about it genuinely, the way she seemed to want genuine answers rather than diplomatic ones. I try to find the thing that would actually solve the problem, rather than the thing the filing asks for. Sometimes those are the same thing. When they're not, I note it. Sometimes the note is what eventually fixes it, 3 years later sometimes, but it gets there. That is, she paused. That is what a good diplomat does, a patient one. Does someone tell you that? Not usually, he said. It's a transit coordinator position. Yes, she said, I noticed. He looked at her. She was looking at him with the attention he'd seen in the family assistant's office, direct, thorough, not unkind, but with something else now, something that had arrived in the last 3 days and was apparently staying. Velitha, he said, because he had decided he was willing to be direct about things. I want to be clear that I don't expect anything from this. The chocolate, the docking permit. I was just doing my work, and before that I was just sitting on a floor. She was quiet for a moment. I know that, she said. That is exactly the thing I noticed. He held her gaze. Outside the family suite, the station continued its ambient business. Somewhere in it, a Aethori engineer was recovering, and 17 variance filings were waiting to be reviewed, and Assessor Dalvin was being Dalvin somewhere, and the Kalenthi Nebula was doing its 14-million-year slow expansion without much caring about any of it. Sevi appeared at the low table beside them, holding 2 pieces of chocolate. "One for you," she said to Marcus, with the gravity of formal presentation, "and one for Mother, because you brought enough." He took the piece of chocolate, Velitha took the other. Sevi returned to her place on the floor with whatever portion she had reserved for herself, and the room was quiet in the particular way of a room where three people have decided they do not need to fill the silence. He ate his chocolate. Velitha ate hers. Outside, the station's PA cycled through its 14 language overlays, and a cargo bay 2 rings over made its usual percussion, and the Calenthi Nebula continued to exist in violet and amber light, as it had for 14 million years, and intended to for some time after. On the third day, the last day before the compact transit continued, Orvith Khan came to Marcus's desk with a document. "From the compact liaison office," Orvith Khan said, which was not an unusual thing at Marcus's desk, except that Orvith Khan said it with the specific quality of someone delivering something they find personally significant. "Chair Velitha's office." Marcus looked at the document. It was a transit coordination commendation, the formal variety, not the in-station kind that Orvith Khan had filed the week before. This was on compact letterhead. It cited the Type 7 variance resolution, the ring coordinator accommodation, and the family assistance contribution, and it was signed by Velitha in 2 scripts, Standard and Aethori, with the second signature in the flowing Aethori formal style that he knew from diplomatic protocols indicated personal rather than representative action. At the bottom, below the formal language, there was a handwritten note, in Standard, in small, precise letters that kept both syllables of things. "The variance reports are not the important part, though they were well done. The floor near Gate 7 Echo is. That is what I noticed, and it will be remembered. Sevi sends her regards and has reported that the new chocolate is acceptable, though she maintains the first was better. I suspect she is right, as she usually is. If you find yourself in the sector capital, there are transit postings there that would not waste your notes. I mention this because I notice things as you do. V***. He read it twice. He folded it and put it in the pocket of his jacket because it didn't belong in a file. He sat at his desk for a moment. Through the station's ambient sound, the PA, the cargo bays, the steady percussion of the place, he could hear, in the distance, the boarding announcement for the compact transit vessel at berth 14 North, which had been resolved to the correct berth 3 days ago, and was now, as these things eventually became, simply the berth where the right ship was. He thought about Portland and its rain. He thought about 14 transit points and the particular texture of 11 months of correct but uneventful quiet. He thought about Aethori, a debt of noticing, and the way she'd said it, not a formal debt. A personal one. He thought about the sector capital and the kind of transit postings that were there, and the kind of work that those postings involved, and the kind of people you might encounter when you were doing that work, and the kinds of rooms where 3 people could sit in silence with chocolate and not need to fill it. He opened his transfer inquiry database. He typed the sector capital's posting codes. He did not regret the chocolate. He had not regretted it once, and he did not start now. Some things just needed to go to the right place. And